Everyone's favorite streaming and binge-watching service is in the news this week for something you might not expect. Netflix's new policy on maternity leave is really revolutionary for the US in that it's a lot more open than what most businesses allow. And a lot of people are saying that this means that we should go on and force a government regulation that means every business does something like this. But I would argue that this is the solution rather than the problem. Because you can see that Netflix has to deal with its workers possibly going to other businesses who give them a better deal. And for that reason, they had to do something to incentivize their workers to stay with them. So their idea was increase maternity leave. And it looks like it's working because they're seeing increases in their stock value since the decision and a lot of good publicity for it. But if this works, then you might be asking, why not just have a government regulation? Because a government regulation across the board would eliminate the choices of businesses to enact something like this and maybe their next revolutionary decision. And it also limits the role that people have in choosing what business they work for. And believe it or not, it might hurt women in the workforce and make it harder for especially young women to get a job. Because they may be discriminated against by a business that assumes that they're more inclined to have a child in later years and they don't want to have to pay for them for their maternity leave. And you might just chalk me up saying this to the new term that the left likes to throw around, male privilege. I didn't know there was a male privilege, but I guess there is now. If you don't take my word for it, you should look into the writings of Abigail R. Hall of the Daily Caller and her article, which I thoroughly enjoyed, titled Mandated Paid Maternity Leave, a bad idea for women. And in this, she describes this idea that I talked about. When you see increases in government-mandated maternity leave, it means that employers are forced to hire less young women because they see it as potentially causing them to have less workers in the future, as they can all go on maternity leave, which is unfair because that's essentially telling young women that they have the choice between having kids or keeping their job. And that's essentially forcing women into a role in this country that's not fair because not all women want to have kids and it should be their choice and not the government's indirectly through these regulations. Now on paper this might sound like a good idea, government regulations that in theory balance the workforce and make it fairer to women, but the free market can do that on its own and competition can do that. We see that this is just essentially limiting choices of employers and more importantly employees, especially young females who, and a lot of times it's harder for them to find a job than young males. So I guess I'll bring up male privilege right now. I'll say right now it's oftenly harder for young women to find a job for a young male, and this is the exact reason for it. Because they're discriminated against because of things like government-mandated maternity leave. That would mean that their business has to put more money into them. But that's not fair. And I feel that the free market has done a great job of setting things like this out in the past, and it can do a good job in the future. If you managed to look past my male privilege for long enough that you actually made it to the end of this video, I just want to thank you and ask if there's any way you could possibly leave a comment, like, and maybe even subscribe if you want to see more videos like this in the future. And again, don't forget to ask, Generation Y.